This guitar looks almost exactly like my first Fender Strat, which I bought brand new in 1970. So when this was introduced last year, I knew I had to get my hands on one. This is the JV Modified 60s Strat from Fender, built in Japan. The model was launched in 2022 along with a 50s Modified Strat and 50s and 60s Modified Tellies. Fender says these are based on the great Japanese vintage series from the 80s. Now, I owned a JV 57 reissue from back then, and it was more of a true vintage spec reissue. This new one is based on a vintage model, but it's significantly modernized. Unlike the majority of 60s reissued Fender Strats, this one is clearly based on a late 60s model, which would explain why it looks so much like the one I bought in 1970. Now, like most modern Fenders that aren't strictly vintage reissues, the truss rod adjustment has been moved to the headstock. And nostalgia notwithstanding, I think it's clearly an improvement over the original design, where you had to keep taking the neck off to adjust the rod. Now, it also has vintage-style locking tuners. I've had a little experience with these, and I do like them. They work very well while retaining the vintage appearance. In fact, the locking mechanism is pretty much invisible unless you look very closely. Like most modern Fenders, the fingerboard radius is 9.5 inches. The width at the bone nut is 1.650 inches, or about 42 millimeters. It's like most vintage models. Another modern touch are the medium jumbo frets. Now, most will find this an improvement over the skinny vintage frets. The neck profile is a soft V, and it's fairly hefty, more like a 50s neck than any 60s model I've played. I measured the depth and got 0.9 inch or 22.8 millimeters at the first fret, and 0.92 inch or 23.4 millimeters at the 12th. It feels great to me and looks perfect. In fact, both the body and neck color look exactly as I remember the one I bought in 1970. Speaking of the body, it's made of basswood. It may not be the traditional alder or ash, but I've always liked it for bolt neck guitars. Every one I've played has been an acoustically loud and lively guitar, and it tends to be fairly lightweight. The weakest part about my original 80s Japanese vintage was the pickups. They weren't terrible by any means, but these are a big improvement. And they should work well for most players, which brings us to the real reason it's called a JV Modified. The tone control is a push-pull pot, which activates the neck pickup in positions 1 and 2 for a couple of extra tonal options that are actually really quite useful, especially the telly-like neck and bridge combo. The only slight letdown I found is the trem block, which is really thin and light. It seems a little out of place on such a beautifully made Strat. Though in truth, the guitar doesn't seem to suffer tonally, which kind of makes me wonder what it might sound like with a heftier unit. All told, this is a sweet Strat, showing the kind of beautiful craftsmanship I've come to expect from Fender Japan. If you're looking for that late 60s vibe, but with some really useful updates, this is worth checking out. I found it instantly comfortable, and I gotta say, I like it a lot. So give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Be sure to subscribe, and I will see you again very soon.